U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Kellogg, is due to visit our country again in the coming days. This was reported by diplomatic sources of the Kyiv Post publication. The visit comes amid the fast-approaching deadline set by the president for a peace deal with Russia. The news of Kellogg's anticipated trip coincides with a planned trip to Russia by Steve Witkoff, another Trump envoy. Let me remind you that Trump said last week that these days Steve Witkoff should arrive in Moscow in order to convey demands to Russia in a tougher form. Sources told the Washington correspondent of Kyiv Post that Witkoff's trip was proposed by the Russians early last week and approved, despite Trump's initial skepticism. The president reportedly told advisers that he thought the trip would be futile. You see, Donald Trump does not believe in any intentions, sincere intentions of the Kremlin, let's say. The diplomatic missions take place against the backdrop of the rapid approach of the ceasefire with Russia, set by Trump himself, which falls on August 8, this Friday. The American president expressed growing frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin, first setting 50 days, then shortening this period even more, and then reducing it to 10 days overall. We will see how the working week ends, whether there will really be any specific restrictions for the Russian Federation. Because I will also remind you that the Russians changed their minds a little, overestimated their position. And Kremlin spokesman Peskov said that Putin was allegedly ready to meet with Zelensky, but after preparatory work. Peskov said that Putin is ready to meet with the Ukrainian president, but, according to him, negotiations at the level of leaders are possible only after some work at the expert level. That's what they call it. I quote further, "All the preparatory work for such a meeting has not yet been done." A Russian official said the president of the Russian Federation may consider a meeting once expert-level work is completed and sufficient progress is made. Something must be done, let's not say what, in order for the leaders to meet, although Trump, Zelensky, and even Erdogan, who offered to mediate in these negotiations, have called for this to be done repeatedly. But we will talk about these negotiations with you a little further, in a slightly different way, because Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced exchanges. He did this after important meetings and reports. The head of state announced some details in his traditional addresses, so then I propose to listen to a direct speech.
Rustem Umerov reported today on his communication with the Russian side. The exchange of 1,200 of our people who are now in captivity is being prepared. We must release everyone, all our military, all our civilians, no matter how difficult it is. The head of the office, Andriy Yermak, reported on communication with our partners, in particular with the Americans. The United States of America is determined to help. I want to thank you for that. Pressure on Russia can really work. It can work just so that they feel the consequences of prolonging the war.
I will also remind you that the main intelligence directorate summed up how the rounds of negotiations in terms of prisoner-prisoner exchanges ended. These are the rounds that took place in June, in particular. So next, I suggest listening to a direct speech.
Istanbul 1 is 1,000 returned Ukrainians. Istanbul 2 is already more than 1,000 returned categories of seriously ill, seriously wounded and young people 25 years younger. Over 1,000, and these exchanges and stages remain incomplete. This is unscheduled work. During this period, 66 exchanges took place and 100 defenders returned. And then, taking into account the fact that the third round has already taken place, preparations are underway for the implementation of the next agreements. This is definitely good news and additional opportunities for Ukraine to return its defenders. The Geneva Conventions provide for the return of prisoners after the end of the active phase of hostilities. But, in particular, taking into account who Ukraine is forced to fight and taking into account the conditions in which our defenders, military, as well as civilians, illegally detained civilian Ukrainians are, of course, everything possible is being done to return people now. During the full-scale invasion, 66 exchanges occurred through the coordination headquarters. And together, taking into account both exchanges and other events, more than 6,000 Ukrainians returned. In fact, it is always not enough because there is still a lot to return, but it is not little.